All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Danny Smith, and I am the Manager of Events and Marketing at Microexcel. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Envision and Shape Your Microsoft Roadmap Strategy, in which you will hear firsthand how to plan better for future releases and get expert input from Microexcel on ensuring your organization takes full advantage of the technology investment and does not get left behind. Presenting today is George Bellotti. George is a results-driven consulting services executive with over 20 years of industry experience. He has spent the last 5 years helping technical and business executives understand the value of envisioning and planning. Just a few laundry items before we get started. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent out in a few days. Also, we will have a Q&A portion at the end, so please type any questions that you may have in the questions box, and we will get to those in the order they are received. If you have any questions after the webinar, please feel free to contact us at info@microexcel.com. Without further ado, I'd like to present our speaker for today's event, Mr. George Bellotti.
Okay, thank you, Danny, and good morning or good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. And I'd also like to thank you for attending the webinar on envisioning and planning. Before we get going, just a little bit of company facts on Microexcel. The company was established in 2001 and is a rapidly growing end-to-end IT solutions and services company. We do have 1,500 employees globally. We experience rapid financial growth. We have averaged double-digit growth year over year throughout our history. We're headquartered globally in Secaucus, New Jersey, with various locations throughout the United States and across the globe. We do have a dedicated center of excellence for SAP, Microsoft, QA testing, and interactive services. We have a very diverse client base, and we work across many industries. The key takeaway on this slide here, as far as our industry domain experience, is that we work with many companies in many industries of varying sizes. And why that's important to you is that we understand the culture in various sizes and types of companies. We understand what it takes to get projects approved and moving forward, and we certainly understand change management within these industries, as each industry is a bit unique. So again, our industry domain experience is very broad. So before we get going, just a couple of poll questions so we have an idea of, kind of to level set where everybody is as far as planning and road mapping. So the first poll question is, do you have a plan or a roadmap in place at this time? And I'll give you a minute to type your answer in.
Okay, George, I will now be closing the poll.
Okay.
And it looks like we had 40% answer with yes, 20% answered with no, and 40% answered with under development.
Okay. And that kind of leads in and leads into the second question is your organization interested in long-range planning and envisioning?
Okay, George, I'll now be closing the poll. And it looks like 60% answered with yes and 40% answered with no.
Okay, thank you, Danny. And hopefully as we go along, you'll see the value of the planning, and for the 40% that say no, hopefully, we can pique your interest in this as it's becoming critical in today's technology world. So just to go over the agenda today, the topics of conversation, we're going to talk about what is envisioning and planning. Why should you plan? What's changed and what is changing that is making this planning and envisioning activity more important? We'll then talk about who is involved in the visioning, what type of stakeholders should be involved from different areas of the company for this type of exercise. We'll talk about the benefits of envisioning, and when we go through the benefits, we'll talk about technical benefits, financial benefits, and business benefits of the envisioning and planning. We'll spend a little time talking about what the output of a planning and envisioning project or engagement should be. And then very importantly, and I think you'll see, kind of anecdotally, what happens if you don't plan. Okay, so what is envisioning? Well, first let's talk a little bit about, kind of the digital transformation. What we want to do is boost team productivity with technology that securely supports a mobile teamwork and flexible work styles. Want to help to optimize operations to drive business efficiencies. Generally, we're seeing more and more people doing this on the cloud platform that'll help to optimize operations and accelerate responsiveness. And then we really want to create, with technology, new revenue opportunities using intelligent technology to innovate on products and processes. So envisioning, it's a project phase where you put together a cross-functional team, and again, we'll talk about who those stakeholders are, that will work with business area subject matter experts to initially help them to explore what type of potential solutions can be brought to bear, what is it that they need, what will help them to be more productive and do their jobs. And then what you want to do, and this is very important in today's world, in the envisioning engagement, is to create visual screenshots of the potential solutions for review and approval. The reason for that is today, with certainly a lot of things being web-based and people being very visual, what you want to do is before you begin to design and build and make some important decisions on things like third-party products, what should the infrastructure look like, where should the infrastructure live, you actually want to show the best you can the solution to the potential end users so that they can kind of give it a thumbs up. And then you can begin to design. What you don't want to do is get through a design phase, begin building, give the solution out to the end users for them to only see for the first time when you get to user acceptance testing. And at that point, they will tend to make suggestions. Some of them are cosmetic and simple, but they may also make some suggestions which make sense and would actually cause you to go back in front of the design phase, which then becomes very intrusive and expensive, and some of your decisions about third-party products and the infrastructure may no longer be valid. So it's very important to create these visual screenshots of the potential solutions and show them to the end users for their review and approval. The team also at that point wants to investigate any potential out-of-the-box and third-party products to support these solutions. At that point, you can investigate and design the appropriate infrastructure environment to support the solutions and allow for future scaling. And that future scaling is very important. If you don't develop a roadmap, the example that I'll use, for example, something like SharePoint, as an organization begins to drive adoption, more and more of the company comes online. We've seen situations, for example, they start out with a company intranet, it works, more and more of the company wants to come online. You get something like the marketing department decides that they want to use SharePoint, and the next thing you know, they dump tons and tons of content into the environment, and the next thing you know, the infrastructure is not working as it was designed to. Even the people who are having a good experience now, all of a sudden, they may be seeing things like very slow return of result sets from searches, which weren't happening in the past because the infrastructure was not actually built to scale into the future because there was not a roadmap and it wasn't built in the beginning for that to happen. An analogy I like to use here is, for example, if you're driving down a block and you look and there are two houses side by side, they're both 4,000 square feet. They both have 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. One was actually built and designed from the beginning as a 4,000 square foot house with the 3 bedrooms, with the 4 bedrooms, with the 3 bathrooms. The infrastructure works, the house looks appropriate, versus a house that may be on the side of it that was originally built as an 1,800 square foot house, and then there was an addition put on the left side, there was addition put onto the right side. Now you have things going on internally, like the heat may not be appropriate, the furthest bedrooms from the boiler are going to take much longer to get warm, and things like that, because it was not really built, initially designed to be that. So the infrastructure in the house isn't working. It's no different when you build out technical solutions and build out a technical environment. You really need to build this thing with a vision for how far down the road you're looking, and the only way to really do that is to build out a roadmap. So, you investigate the design and the appropriate infrastructure environment to support the solutions that allow for the future scaling. Another thing that happens in the planning and envisioning project is you create project budgets for these solutions. You establish governance guidelines at that time, so that what you don't do is basically go back to the old file folder disaster where you've got dead content, but now today it's just living in websites as opposed to in the file folders. So governance guidelines are very important, and you want to create those up front so that people are actually working with good habits in the environment. You would also create at this time project timelines. So once you have created the project budgets and the project timelines, then you can vet and prioritize the potential solutions and applications. And what will happen is you will see that some of these solutions really only become nice to have, because when you take a look at the effort and the cost involved, the executives are going to look and make decisions that, you know what, it was a good idea, but quite frankly, it doesn't make sense for the cost and the time involved. We need to put the resources elsewhere. For those solutions that there is a decision in the roadmap to go forward, well, now you've got an idea of how long is each solution going to take, how much is it going to cost, and you can actually prioritize. Some of your prioritization is going to happen because certain solutions may actually be prerequisites to others, so they have to go first. But otherwise, the leadership team can take a look at what's been given to them in the way of project budgets and timelines, and they can make some decisions and do some prioritization. Once all of that's done, then you can create this final roadmap to be followed. Okay, so why plan, and what's changed? So today we have multiple platform choices. It's not like it used to be where you've got, way back when there were mainframes, then you had server farms on premises. Well, today you can build these solutions on premises, in a hybrid environment, in the cloud, or with software as a service. And in many organizations, there's actually a blend of all of these. And quite frankly, there's some integration across that. So it's very important that you make the right decisions. Another reason for this is there are often multiple owners across platforms. And again, I'm going to use SharePoint as an example. You have one big SharePoint environment, but within that environment, there are many sites and there are site owners. As a rule, in most organizations, information technology no longer owns those sites. They may support them, but the ownership is actually with the site owners and departments. So now today, you've actually got multiple owners within your environment. There's also today increased integration across the applications and the solutions. And of course, security has become very important, and there's much more granular security requirements, particularly if you're looking at hybrid or cloud type solutions. A lot of organizations very concerned about security. Another reason is you want to plan because there are so many options, so many ways to do things, right? You can have a desktop that looks like this. You can work, today Office 365 offers all of these. The Azure platform offers all of these options. Quite frankly, it's very overwhelming. And we, Microexcel, as one of the leaders in the industry, have to move in a very rapid, fast-paced way just to know what all these options are, how do they work, how should they be applied. So to think that a company who has an information technology department but really is in business to do something else, create other goods and services, is going to be up to speed on all of these does not make sense. So, quite frankly, this is where a lot of companies use our expertise because there are so many options, and how do you really know how to go about it? There's many ways to skin the cat, and which way is the best way. So you really need to plan and take a look at all your options so that you can actually make the proper selections of the route that you're going to go. Another reason is, if you look at platforms, and again, I'm going to use SharePoint example. The platforms today, because they are platforms, there are many potential uses. So for example, with SharePoint, it could be used as an intranet. It could be used as a document management solution. You can use it for project sites to manage projects. These could be long-term or short-term projects, right? And they could be used across many functional areas with differing needs and security considerations. And in fact, some of these project sites themselves are cross-functional. So you need to plan for this to have the proper infrastructure, site structures, and security considerations and governance. And in order to build the proper infrastructure that's going to live in the appropriate place, whether it be on-prem, in the cloud, or hybrid, with the effective security and governance, the team really needs to understand the entire landscape prior to designing and building out the environment where these things are going to live. And again, you want to look across a certain period of time, be it 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. You really want to build out a roadmap so that you build out that appropriate infrastructure with the effective security that's going to last as you scale and as you begin to add more solutions into the environment. So who should be involved? Who should you plan with? Who are the key stakeholders? So from the technology point of view, you really need to have representation from applications development, project management, infrastructure, and security. And then, of course, the future owners of the platform, whoever they may be, need to be involved. In order for you to put together the cost estimates and design and figure out how long things are going to take, you need applications development, project management, and of course, the infrastructure. People need to be involved in order to figure out where is this going to live. And then, security people need to be involved to make sure that you have a secure environment. And then those future owners also need to be involved because they're going to be with the platform going forward. Business stakeholders. So as far as this cross-functional team, from the business stakeholders, you want to have department or area executive sponsor involved. You want to have subject matter experts. These are the people that are basically going to help to visualize what are these solutions going to be, what are they going to look like, and you want them to basically, help you to design it from a functional point of view. And then, of course, whoever the key users are going to be, you want them to be involved. This is going to help to drive change management. We don't want to do things the old way where you build out a solution and then you give it to the users and you let them have at it, and it may or may not be exactly what they want. If you have them involved in doing the design from the beginning, well, they're going to feel some ownership. They're going to help to drive the change. The system is going to be used. Even today, a very large number of solutions are technical successes They work the way they were designed to work, but they may not necessarily be a business success because they're not being used. And, I've seen some surveys where they're saying still over 50% of solutions that are built or bought and put into place are not being used effectively. So to hedge against that, if you involve these people from the beginning to help to design it, then chances of change management going successfully and the solution being used are much greater. And an analogy that I like to use here is what happens is once you visualize it and they know what's being built, ultimately when you get out of planning, you get into the standard development and you're going to go into a more detailed requirements phase. What you don't want to do is go in and say, let's just collect all the requirements that are possible and then go through a vetting exercise. The analogy I use here is you can bring two children into a candy store and you tell them, one of them, you can have one piece of candy and that's it. The other one, you don't tell them that. Well, when they're walking out of the store, the child that was told that has one piece of candy walks out and they're happy. The other one had fistful of candy and you had to vet through and take some of them away and let them end up with the one that they want most. And they're both walking out with one piece of candy, but the one who had the fistful that you had to take most of them away from them is not very happy. So you're much better off to visualize and create some guidelines so that when you get into the requirements phase, you already have guidelines on it and it's easy to point to the documents and the output, which we're going to talk about, that came from the planning phase and say, no, time out, that's not what we're building. Here's the visuals, here's the screenshots, here's what we're going to build. So very important that you involve these people from the beginning. And then, of course, the VPs and directors of the lines of business, departments, and territories also should be involved. As far as executive stakeholders, well, this is where the change is going to be driven from. These are the people that are going to make decisions. These are the people that are going to approve the budgets. So it's very important to involve department and area heads who have budgetary and decision-making authority. Management stakeholder who's responsible to drive the change management is also very important if that's not the same person or persons. The whole idea of this planning and road mapping is to ultimately come out with a decision of what are we going to do, what are we going to build over a certain period of time. And if you think about it, if you don't have the decision makers involved, it's going to be very difficult to get decisions made. So generally, you want to involve some of the C-level executives in this type of planning, engagement, or project as you go through it. Okay, so the benefits. So technical benefits. So all design and security infrastructure decisions are vetted and made upfront and across all considerations, ensuring that an appropriately stable and secure environment for users to work in based on the actual needs of the enterprise. You've gone through the future potential solutions, so all future considerations have been accounted for, lessening the need for major changes to the underlying environment, security, and performance of the solution. And you can then select the third-party tools that are necessary and are assessed and included into the environment, lowering the cost and improving performance and productivity. An example that I like to use here, we've seen situations where organizations don't plan and don't have roadmaps and workflow, for example. If you're going to build one workflow, and again, I'm going to use SharePoint as an example, well, only one workflow is going to be built. You can use the out-of-the-box workflow capabilities of SharePoint. You can build that workflow. But we've had organizations where they've done that. They've built the second workflow. They've built the third workflow. At this point, they may have spent $100,000 of budget to build out these workflows. And all of a sudden, a bell goes off and, we'll go back to them and say, you haven't had a plan here. Are there going to be a lot of workflows? And the answer is yes. Well, then really what you want to do is go to third-party products. So for example, these are some of the third-party vendors that we are partnering with. And, you know, in the case of my example here, we would recommend something like an Intex workflow engine to help them to build these workflows much more quickly, much less expensively, and much more seamlessly. And you buy the tool once and you use it over and over again, and it lowers cost and it lowers timelines. But without planning and knowing, for example, that you're going to have a number of workflows in the environment, you may start out by building these things custom, where with the plan, you would have gone out and bought something like an Intex to do this. Business benefits. So the visual screenshots are going to help to minimize changes after a user acceptance testing. And again, you know, once you've gone through the design phase, if you need to go back and redesign, often it gets very intrusive and very expensive. And while that's an inconvenience and an expense, if it happens too often, then the project becomes very unpopular, management becomes very unhappy, often projects can be canceled, and, you know, people's jobs could be on the line. So you don't want to have to keep going back, making changes, and going back for more money and having costly delays. The SME involvement is going to help to drive change management and user acceptance, and we talked about that prior. And the business owners are going to take ownership of the solutions. The other thing is, it is much easier to actually get executive approval. One of the things that we see fairly often when projects don't get approved, companies will go through kind of a quasi-design phase. For example, they're going to build out an intranet, and they don't really go through the detailed exercises of planning it and road mapping it. And what happens is you end up going to executive management looking for approval with a presentation that goes something like, we're going to build the company intranet. It's going to take somewhere between 2 months and 8 months, and it'll cost between $40,000 and $150,000. 9 times out of 10, that project is not going to get approved because the executives are going to be risk averse because they don't know, is it going to take 2 months? Is it going to take 8 months? Is it going to cost $40,000? Or is it going to cost $150,000? And, you know, there's a lot of contention for budgetary money today in organizations. And if another team comes in looking for some budget and they've got a very buttoned up presentation where there doesn't seem to be any risk to the executives to make a decision to say yes, that's generally going to hop over these projects in priority, and it's going to get approved, and these projects are not going to. So it's very important to be able to put together a very tight presentation to the executives to actually get project approval. Financial benefits. So the visual screenshots approved by the business and area experts help to minimize the potential of these expensive changes being made after the budgets are approved. The tighter timelines and budgets and more detailed solution depictions, as I said earlier, will make it easier to go for approval. And again, you know, many initiatives aren't approved because they just don't have enough detail. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the artifacts and what should be the output of a planning engagement, what should be the deliverables. So on the roadmaps, eventually what's going to happen is you're going to have these nominated potential solutions to be included in the environment. You've vetted through them based on the information that you put together on cost and timelines, and you actually will nominate some of the solutions to be included. You need to have the visual screenshots and wireframes of the solutions for better understanding before the construction begins. And again, these are very valuable at the time that you collect requirements. They serve as guardrails on the requirements so that when people begin to bring in things that really are not planned to be part of the solution, you can very easily point to the documents that came out of this exercise and say, no, this is actually what we're building now. We need to kind of stick to it with the requirements, so it makes it a lot easier. You want to have a list of the third-party products that are going to be employed in the environment to support the solutions, whatever they may be. You also are going to have solution budgets and timelines so that you can vet and prioritize and go for approval with the detailed information that's necessary. You will also be able to then, as part of the roadmap, have a designed infrastructure that is going to support the solutions and is actually going to scale with the environment into the future. So again, you don't run into the example that I use with the marketing department coming in with a lot of content, and all of a sudden your environment gets crushed under, all of that content. Obviously, you're going to have current state. This is a phase. These roadmaps are phased. So you're going to have current state. You're going to have near term. You're going to have long term. There will be cloud initiatives. There may be on-prem. You may use things like Azure. Again, these all get vetted out and become part of the roadmap as you develop it. Also, you want to have project plans, right? Project recommendations of the timeline. What's going first? What's going second? What will be done third? So that you have cohesive construction of the environment and things are done in the proper order based on priorities that were established throughout the planning engagement. Obviously, there will be time and cost estimates, right? So in this case is an example of a 3-year plan where you have your time estimates, you have your cost estimates. Everybody knows what is going to be done when, in what time frame, and what is it going to cost so that budgeting can be done. Again, these documents are very important to get executive approval. So the flip side, what happens if you don't plan? And we see this very often. So basically, the lack of the detailed information, it's going to make it much more difficult to gain executive approval. A lack of the visual depictions are going to increase the potential of substantial changes and surprises, and the surprise need for supporting tools, which cause scope creep and project delays. And again, I'll refer back to my example of workflows where, you all of a sudden realize that, hey, we're going to be building a number of workflows over a period of time. So now let's go out and buy a tool. And that tool was not accounted for in the beginning. So all of a sudden it's an extra cost that's necessary. And right away you're looking at some scope creep and you're looking at some project delays. And again, if these things happen time and again, they begin to get very unpopular. The lack of user involvement is going to make it much harder to drive change and gain user acceptance. And quite frankly, it's really close to impossible to make the proper infrastructure decisions to support all of these solutions across the enterprise and properly scale in the future with the appropriate governance if you have not accounted for everything that's going to be done and put into the environment over a period of time. So again, without planning, ultimately you're going to end up with surprises, third-party products that weren't planned for that need to be purchased. You don't want to have that happen. Change management is going to be more difficult, and generally things become very unpopular when that happens. So let's talk a little bit about working with Microexcel to, if you choose, a lot of companies will do this planning on their own more and more today because of the screens that I showed you earlier with all of the potential options that are available today, more than ever before, more integration than ever before. Some of them in some ways are almost interchangeable. So how do you decide what am I going to use? Well, you really need, generally, you're going to need a partner who understands these, who is in business to have a deep understanding of all your potential options and has experience in working with organizations prior to working with you and seeing how these options work out. You know, it generally helps. More and more organizations are actually bringing partners like Microexcel on board to help them to actually develop these roadmaps so that it can be done effectively. So the scoping is fairly simple. We can usually give you an initial cost estimate of what does a planning engagement cost. Again, this is the planning engagement. It's not the cost of the roadmap over the period of time. In the example that we used, the 3 years, it's not that cost, right? That's actually going to be the output of the planning engagement itself. But we can usually give you an initial cost estimate basically after a brief conference call or an on-site visit. And as far as what do you need to know coming into that meeting, generally you have to have some idea of the number of and the types of solutions that you would like to include in planning. And the reason why we say the number of is it's really a matter of math, right? We need to figure out how many solutions are going to be part of the roadmap, how many departments have to be met with in order to do this visualizing, right? So you would need to give us at least some type of idea of the types of things that you want to do throughout the period. Could be fairly basic, will help to facilitate, you know, to bring some color to these solutions so that you can get more detailed about them. And then also you need to have some basic information on what your current infrastructure looks like, so we kind of have an idea of what the starting point is, what you have in place at the current time. And then at that point, you know, we could generally give you a pretty good cost estimate so that you can then decide if it makes sense and if you think that, you know, the organization now has the appetite for this type of planning and envisioning engagement. If not, so if you don't have this information, a lot of companies don't, right? One of the reasons they're coming to us is because they don't understand what all of the possible options are out there. So without understanding that, they really don't have a great vision of what it is they can do. They really just know functionally from a business point of view what they want to accomplish. That's fine. We will then facilitate it through the collection of all of the information that's necessary. And in that case, you know, an on-site visit will probably be more appropriate than a conference call. But certainly, you know, we can do it via a conference call also. At this point, you know, I'd like to open it up to any questions that anybody may have, see if I can, you know, hopefully answer any questions that pop up.
Okay, George, it does look like we have had a question come through during your presentation, and that question is, how long do planning or envisioning engagements typically last?
Okay, so again, it depends, right? This scales also. So I've seen planning engagements where they're pretty simple. By the way, there's various types of planning. Some organizations will want to plan for an entire roadmap over a period of time. That's going to take a little longer. Some organizations just have a simple solution or a singular solution that they want to do. But even if you're going to build a singular solution today, you still need to take a look at almost all of the considerations that I just walked through, but it's going to be brief and it's going to be much quicker. So I've seen simple planning engagements that take a couple of weeks, and then, you know, we've done planning engagements for major corporations that are building out a roadmap, which ultimately the roadmap is going to have, you know, $1 million budget. Well, that being the case, then that planning engagement might last 2 to 3 months. So it really depends. And again, that could be established upfront in that initial call so that you don't have to go too far down the road before you decide that this makes sense for the organization or not. So it kind of scales on how many solutions you're looking to plan for and how long is the time frame that you're planning over.
Okay, great. Thank you, George. We'll give everyone some time to get their questions in here. And it looks like we've just had another come through. That question is, does the cloud change how you plan or envision?
So yes, the cloud does change things a bit, only in that you're making a decision on your infrastructure. Often, what you need to do is take a look at the solutions, take a look at security, take a look at some budgeting, and then really a decision is made. Are you going to build these things in the cloud, or are you going to build them some type of hybrid, or is there a reason that you feel that they need to stay on premises? Often, even today still, if it's going to go in the cloud, we find that there's a little more time and consideration spent to security. Companies want to make sure that if they're going to put information in the cloud, they want to make sure they know what information is going out there and that it is secured. But once the solution is actually, being designed, then the cloud's not making a real big difference then. But overall, it does make a difference when you're taking a look at your infrastructure and where things are going to live.
Thank you, George. We've had a few questions come through. The first one is, can you limit cloud access to corporate networks only including email?
Say that again, Danny?
Sure. It is, can you limit cloud access to corporate networks only including email?
I believe the answer to that is yes. But what I want to suggest is, I'm much more of a business development executive than a detail level technical person. So what I would say is I'm going to put a slide up with two types of contact information. One will be my personal contact information. The other will be info@microexcel.com. If you want to just email that, I could get you a more detailed answer with an explanation. But I believe the answer to that is yes.
Okay, thank you. The other question we've had come through is, what would be a ballpark rate for an SME company to give an envisioning planning towards their business needs? Is it possible to give a rough dollar amount?
For me to give a rough dollar amount right now, so I'm not sure that question. I'm not sure if you're exactly what you're asking, but I will tell you that most planning engagements, if we look at the average company and the average planning engagement, I would say they run between $15,000 and $30,000. But, I've seen simple ones that are as cheap as $7,500, and I've seen them, go into six figures. It really depends on, if one or two solutions is involved and there is an in-place infrastructure that's being used and will be used and doesn't really need to be a lot of design there, then it's going to be on the lower end of the range. If a company is going to totally change directions, for example, and go from on-premises to 100% cloud-based and has, 10 solutions that are going to be built over a 3-year period, then obviously that's going to be more expensive. But generally, I'm going to say they're $10,000, $15,000 to $30,000 in cost as an order of magnitude, if I understand the question correctly.
Thank you, George. It looks like we've had one more question come through, and that is, does it make a difference that we are a small organization?
No, it doesn't. Organizations of all sizes need to plan. In general, I find small organizations will actually need the planning services of a partner like a Microexcel a little more, because being small, their information technology department is smaller. So, people multitask. For example, there's not a governance team and a security team and an infrastructure team and a development team and a project management team, right? They may have 3 or 4 employees that are the IT department, and they multitask, so it's really virtually impossible for them to have the domain expertise across everything that they need to know. So often the smaller organizations benefit greatly from, I should say more greatly from a planning engagement, particularly with a partner like a Microexcel.
Okay, another question that just came through was, and first of all, they said, thanks for the info. One more quick question. Would this envisioning permits to only MSFT stack or any other technology tools, or even MSFT versus IBM or MSFT versus Oracle?
It's all the same, no matter what you're going to do. If you're going to build something, you need to do the envisioning and the planning, whether it's, you know, Microsoft, it's IBM, or it's an Oracle-based environment. Now, you know, the expertise that you go out and you secure to do it, if you don't have it internally, obviously is going to be different. But quite frankly, it's all the same. It doesn't matter what your underlying technical direction or, you know, your main vendor, if you're an IBM shop, a Microsoft shop, an Oracle shop. Planning is agnostic. You need to do it regardless.
Okay, thank you, George. As there are no more questions, this does conclude today's webinar. A recording of this will be sent to all participants. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please email info@microexcel.com. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Okay, and thank you everybody for attending.